All right, we have a few more people in the waiting room, so we'll just give it a bit.
I would like some canning.
If you will remember to please mute yourself if you're not already muted, just so we can prevent background noise. That would be very helpful.
Meeting is being recorded.
All right. It's looking like the waiting room is clearing, so we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Plant Talk Gardening for Pollinators. It's our winter Plant Talk series. And I am Hannah Pinio with Plant Nebraska. I'm the executive director, and today we are happy to have guest speakers Bob Gittens and Stacey Courey from the nonprofit organization Nebraska Monarchs to talk about gardening for pollinators. It's one of our favorite topics, and of course, one of our most popular because everyone here wants to support pollinators in any way that we can. Nebraska Monarchs has been working to restore pollinator habitat in the Midwest since 2015 through free milkweed seed and native plant giveaways. And we're looking forward to hearing more from Bob and Stacey today. But before we get to the plant talk, I just want to remind you that Plant Nebraska's tree planting, garden making, and environmental outreach work is funded in part by memberships and donations from people like you who value sustainable landscaping, native plants, trees, and of course, pollinators that we all support. So if you're not already a member of Plant Nebraska, we would love for you to become one. And Toby's going to drop a link in the chat that will show you how you can join online right now. But you can also find out more about our different membership levels and benefits at our website, plantnebraska.org/join. You can also go to plantnebraska.org to find out more information about our upcoming events. We did release Spring Affair Preview Party tickets last week. So if you are interested in coming to Spring Affair Preview Party, now is the time to get your tickets. Once again, just go to plantnebraska.org and you'll be able to find them there. I'd like to thank JEO Consulting for sponsoring this year's Winter Plant Talk series. Next week, please note that our plant talk on Thursday is at 7 p.m. Central, so it will be a little bit later than the noon time that we have been having them. We're doing something a little bit different that we're excited about. So poets Twyla Hansen and Victoria Bogatz will be reading a selection of their poetry and talking about how Nebraska landscapes has influenced and inspired their work. So definitely don't miss that one. You can register at plantnebraska.org. Just a quick reminder to please keep your microphone on mute for now. And if you have questions for Bob and Stacey, you can put them in the chat and we'll keep track of them and we'll make sure to address them after their presentation. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Stacey and Bob. So thank you both for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much, Hannah. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I know I'm excited to be here. Stacey and I have been excited to do this for quite some time since Plant Nebraska invited us. So we're just happy that we're part of the winter plant talks. So I'll start off by just giving a quick introduction for myself and then also Stacey. And then after Stacey and I introduce ourselves, I'll just give you a little bit of background of Nebraska Monarchs if you're not familiar with our organization. I'll also then do a little bit of we have an agenda for you. The topic that we're covering today is really, how to get started on or how to create a pollinator garden. So before I do our full introductions between Stacey and I'll just kind of give you an overview of our agenda and what you can expect in the conversation today. So we'll be covering the benefits of native plants. I'll actually talk about the pros and cons of native plants, and I'm sorry, the pros and cons of non-native plants. So benefits of native plants, pros and cons of non-native plants. Then Stacey will go over how to create a pollinator garden. So how do you get started? Selecting the right plants for your space, choosing native plants, and then establishing and maintaining your garden. After Stacey gives you that part on creating your pollinator garden, I'll come back and talk about how do you keep your pollinators safe now that you've attracted them. And then we'll also talk about educating and encouraging others. And then we'll also discuss a little bit about what we have upcoming at Nebraska Monarchs, some of our programs. And then we'll also share.
I think we lost Bob. So he'll come back, I'm sure. Stacey,
Yeah.
if you want
Okay, so I'll kind of take over. I'm going to go ahead and are you guys seeing my introduction slide on there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
you can
Okay,
see it.
cool. I'm going to let Bob go ahead and introduce himself. I think he came back on.
He's still frozen on our end here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and introduce myself then. My name is Stacey Courey. I've been with Nebraska Monarchs for about 3 years. I just joined the board this year. I've been kind of in charge of the plant giveaway for the last 3 years. So I'm so excited to be with you guys. And let's see if we can get Bob back on, but if not, I can keep going on the benefits of native plants.
Yeah, I don't see him anymore. So he must be needing to log back in.
Okay. Well, hang on one sec. Okay, here we go. All right, so go back. Let's go ahead and talk about the benefits of native plants. Native plants are amazing. They provide essential food and shelter for local pollinators. They improve the soil health. So the roots that they have, oops, sorry, hang on a sec. Bob, do you want to go ahead and go?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This error keeps kicking me out. Sorry about that, folks. Thanks, Stacey, for continuing on as I had a little bit of tech issue there. So
Yeah.
I can see your notes there, though.
Okay, here, let me get.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure where I cut out. I think I was almost done with the agenda when I cut out. So
yes, you were. And Stacey introduced herself as well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. I'll just do a really quick introduction then. So my name's Bob Gittens. I'm the founder of Nebraska Monarchs, and I really, the way that I got involved with Nebraska Monarchs and started what is now Nebraska Monarchs is I created a memorial garden for my father, and I went to the big box stores, and I bought all the plants that said attracts pollinators. I planted them. I had this gorgeous growing garden. It looked great, but there were no pollinators coming. So I didn't know anything about pollinators. I just knew I wanted to have one to memorialize my father. And so the whole summer, nothing came to my garden. I mean, there was a couple butterflies and bees, but really nothing was using it like I had thought. So unfortunately, I felt like I had failed. So I spent that winter researching about pollinator gardens and pollinator plants, and found out there was a unique relationship between pollinators and native plants, and that if you did not have native plants, you probably weren't going to attract too many pollinators. So that's where I started out on my journey with native plants, was not knowing anything at all. Really, and making mistakes that a lot of us who first get involved in creating a pollinator garden make, which is not planting the right plants. So that's kind of the background of how Nebraska Monarchs got started, and what we do. Really, it starts with what happened to me. I didn't know anything about native plants. So what Nebraska Monarchs does is we meet people where they are. So we service Nebraskans all across the state, and we want to meet you where you are. You might be someone who has been studying native plants for 25 years and know way more than Stacey and I could ever tell you, or today might be your first time learning about native plants. So um, so that's really what we do here at Nebraska Monarchs is just meet people where they are and help them on their journey for a native plant garden. So that's kind of the background and an introduction to myself. We really do focus on providing resources and like plants. I'm not sure, Stacey, if you talked about that in your intro, but one of the big things that we do are plant giveaways, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So if you just want to go to that next slide, I'll go into the benefits of native plants.
And I just want to apologize really quickly. I'm having a little bit of trouble. When I put it in presenter mode, it won't let me unmute myself and come back. So I have to escape the presenter mode every time. So apologies, guys, for that, but we'll get this figured out here. So I'll let you go ahead and go.
Sure. Yeah. So with the benefits of native plants, really one of the big things that I want to talk about here on the benefits of native plants is it's really about these are providing the resources for our pollinators that that non-native plants just do not provide. So when it comes to native plants, pollinators co-evolved with native plants. So the bees and the birds and the bats, all of those different pollinators that really, that we think about, they were here living with the native plants. We came in and really, destroyed the land by, creating farms, creating the suburbs, the cities, and we took out a lot of those plants. So what pollinators need is those native plants to eat. So there's specific plants are host plants. So a lot of people probably have learned about milkweed or known about milkweed. That's a host plant for the monarchs specifically. And many of our native plants are host plants. So a host plant is something an insect will lay its eggs on or the larva will use to eat or shelter over winter. So native plants, they provide that food, that shelter, and all the things that our native pollinators need to survive. And when we're thinking about pollinators, we should really be thinking about bats, moths, all kinds of insects, right? Birds, butterflies, bees, all those. So all of those species rely on native plants for food and shelter. Another thing that is a benefit of native plants is really they really can improve our soil health. So I live in the suburbs. All the topsoil was destroyed when they built the neighborhood. When I moved in, I think my house was 2 years old. You could barely put a shovel in the ground. It was such tough clay. So one thing that native plants do is they can improve that soil health. They have really great long, deep roots that allow minerals and nutrients to go down into the ground, also water. And along with that, as the roots die back and the plants die back, they create organic matter that then creates a healthier soil for your yard. So they can actually do improvements to your soil by planting them. Another thing that is really cool about native plants is they attract a lot of beneficial insects. So I know I talked a little bit about how they can be host plants for monarchs, and a lot of us think of the hummingbirds and bees and butterflies when we think about native plants and attracting them. But there's also beetles, uh, wasps, all kinds of insects that are beneficial that the native plants attract as well. I'm not sure if any of you have milkweed already or other native plants or even non-native plants, but if you've ever had aphids in your garden, they start to kill your plants by sucking the juice. They're not going to kill the whole plant, but they're going to make the flowers less pretty and the leaves die. So if you have aphids, one thing about native plants is they're going to attract maybe some ladybugs. They're going to attract maybe some lacewings or some wasps. And those beneficial insects are going to eat those aphids or other pests that might be damaging your garden. So native plants can benefit our other plants by attracting those predatory insects that will kill those other insects that are damaging our flower beds. So it's a natural defense against some of those garden pests is what I would call them. So that's another benefit of native plants. A little bit, I'll go back to the roots again. The roots of native plants are very long, right? I don't know if any of you have seen pictures of some like little blue stem or big blue stem and how long some of those root systems can get, 7-8 feet long. I've seen pictures of those long sets of roots can sequester quite a bit of carbon, cleaning our air. Your grass lawn, if you've ever dug up your roots, you might have roots that are, 2 or 3 inches long max. They're not holding much carbon, right? They're not doing a lot of good to improve our air. Plus, a lot of us are using two-cycle engines to mow that lawn, sometimes bi-weekly, adding more air pollution by doing so. So planting native plants that are perennials, that are there, that don't need to be mowed, you're getting a multiplier of carbon sequester right there. You're improving our air quality by planting natives. Then also they're better prepared to deal with those local climate conditions. Going back to the very first bullet point of where I spoke about these native plants have co-evolved with where we live, right? So they've evolved to really be able to handle all the different climate conditions that are thrown their way. I know we talk quite a bit about climate change and how that impacts our native plants, but for the most part, established native plants, they can weather a lot of the conditions coming at them. Not saying native plants are maintenance free, because that's absolutely not true. And I'll let Stacey talk a little bit more about that. But they are better equipped to handle those local climate conditions. Just the other day, on Monday, my sister called me asking about her Asiatic lilies and is it too late to dig them out and transplant them and all these things, right? So she's been for years digging these plants out and bringing them in her basement and storing them in the garage and things like that. So even thinking about some of those plants that we have to bring in or replant every year because they can't survive our winters is a great reason to have native plants, because it's going to save you time and money in your garden. And to that next point, most native plants are perennials. Some are annuals or biennials. That is true, but there's not as many annual native plants as there are perennials. So again, saving you money and time when you're planting your garden. And the last point here is native plants can really be stunning. They're not all grass, they're not all sedge. There are a lot of beautiful flowers that unfortunately we just haven't seen. And when you go into the garden centers, they don't always showcase. So when you open your eyes to the world of native plants, you're going to find out how stunning some of these plants really can be if you give them a chance. With that, we'll talk about the pros and cons of non-native plants. I don't know if we'll let you advance the slide there, Stacey, or not. I know you said you're having some.
Yep, we're seeing using non-native plants.
Oh, you are? Okay, perfect.
Yep,
sorry, I'll go back into the presenter mode. Again, apologies.
All right. So using non-native plants, so there are I'm going to start with the pros. And I'm just going to start off by saying as well, as I am not someone who, I know there's a lot of people that are enthusiastic about native plants that are really on you have to use native plants. Non-native plants don't do anything good for our environment. I'm not of that mindset. I absolutely encourage using native plants, absolutely. But I don't think having some non-native or what I would call traditional garden plants is a bad thing. I'll always have irises in my garden, no matter where I live. I have irises that I took from my grandmother's farm that are feet away from me from where I'm sitting on the other side of this wall. And those have special sentimental meaning to me. And as a reminder of my grandmother every time I walk out my door when they're blooming, and it brings me a smile. There's also ones that my mother and I planted when I was a small boy, probably 5 or 6 years old, that I took from my family home and have in my front yard. And that makes me think of my mother every day when they're blooming. So I'm always going to have some of those non-natives. I I love zinnias. Zinnias, I have a whole plot of zinnias and dahlias because I love them as a flower. I use them for cut flowers. They also they open up great conversations with my neighbors about all my other non-native plants because zinnias can be they bloom and they're just vibrant in so many colors. So I'm definitely not someone who's anti non-native plant. But there are some pros and cons that I do want to talk about. One, for pros, um, you know, they can be, like I already said, very stunning and beautiful. Um, and they can also attract pollinators. This one with the monarch on it, that's a zinnia if you're not familiar with it. My zinnia patch is full of butterflies and bees, especially in the fall. So they can be a plant that the pollinators can get nectar from. So not only are they can be stunning, but they can serve good for the pollinators. They can be less aggressive since they can't survive our winters. Maybe their seeds won't spread, maybe their roots won't spread, which sometimes you can have with native plants. A lot of times, one of the best things I think about non-native annuals is when you put them in the ground, they start blooming right away oftentimes, right? So you can have this beautiful showcase of blooms the entire season. So those are some really good pros about using non-native plants in your garden. Some of the cons, though, is they usually need a lot more care. You're having to water them more. You have to be really mindful. Am I giving them too much sun? Are they too much shade? Why aren't they blooming? You have to do a lot more maintenance with the blooms, pulling the blooms off to keep them blooming. And I would say most of the non-native plants, they don't have value to pollinators as a food source, as a host plant in terms of larva or winter shelter. So that's a con, I think, a big con, especially if we're only using non-native plants and now our pollinators don't have any food sources. So they're not really providing any ecological benefit to our gardens. And I think that's a bad thing. So I think using all non-native plants really impacts negatively uh, the animal species that live in Nebraska, and I think that's unfortunate. So if you have some non-natives that you love, if you can just mix in some natives, it's going to add so much more value to our ecosystem. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stacey, who's going to actually take over from here and talk about how you can create a pollinator garden.
All right, guys, I'm unmuting myself and I'm going back into presentation view. Nothing like some technology problems to kick things off, make things interesting, right? Okay, hang on a sec. Let me get to where we are. So first of all, thank you guys so much for your interest in pollinators. I'm going to talk to you about how to strategically go about creating a pollinator garden. So as Bob mentioned, there's a lot of benefits to native plants, some benefits to non-native. So essentially with Nebraska Monarchs, what we've done is we kind of put the biggest bang for our buck we found is in native plants. So that's kind of where we have focused as an organization. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk through you today. Whereas, say you want to start a pollinator garden, how to go about doing that using native flowers. So first of all, what you want to think about is selecting plants for your space. A lot of times you can't change these features. And so it's really important that you kind of check out the space that you want to plant your pollinator garden for and kind of monitor it. How much sunlight does it receive? So if it's receiving 6 hours or more of sunlight, you're looking at a full sun garden. If it's receiving 3 to 6 hours of sunlight, that's a part sun garden. But the trick here is that the sun is there.
I think we lost
When it gets
Stacey.
3. Oh,
There you are. You're back. All right, go ahead.
are we okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you just froze for a few moments. So if you go
Oh,
back
what?
one or two sentences, you'll be perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So part sun is part sun is 3 to 6 hours of direct sunlight each day. Part shade is when you have 3 to 6 hours of sunlight. However, it's in the morning or the afternoon. So for example, my garden out front gets it right in the morning and right in the afternoon. So that would be kind of part shade. And then full shade is if it's 3 hours or less. And then deep shade is essentially it can survive on no sunlight. I would definitely recommend if you're looking to do a pollinator garden to pick a spot that has full sun because you will have the most selection when it comes to native plants to choose from. Another thing to think about is water. So some native plants love having those wet feet and others do not do well. So I have this place on the side of my house that just water sits there all summer long. And that would be a great candidate for a rain garden or gardens or plants that don't mind having those wet feet. Whereas there are a lot of like swamp milkweed would be an example. Whereas butterfly milkweed likes that dry soil. It likes things that drain. So they would not do well in that. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Does water sit in this area? And if not, then go kind of stay away from anything that would be good for a rain garden. But if it does, think about plants that would be good for a rain garden. Now, soil types. So we have 3 main types of soil that we're looking at. There's this picture here. There's sandy soil, where essentially it's just like what it sounds. It's pretty much just sand. There's really no cohesion. It's really easy to dig. And what happens is the water drains immediately from it. There's loam soil, which is kind of in the middle. It has some water retention. It's still easy to dig. And then there's clay, which is what I have, which is pretty hard to dig. It's like if you dig in that soil and it comes out in a clump, you probably have clay soil. And I'm going to say, if you have clay soil, don't be discouraged because swamp milkweed loves clay soil. There are some plants that absolutely love clay soil. They like that the moisture is retained. Another thing you can do is if you find that you like a plant that kind of has a different soil type, you can modify it with compost. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about with soil type is that native plants are pretty good about adapting to soil type. The reason we point it out is because we have found that certain soil types, the plants just go crazy in. So for instance, I mentioned my swamp milkweed with my clay soil. They're just so beautiful. Whereas I was having trouble growing butterfly milkweed. Well, I had a friend who was like, no trouble growing butterfly milkweed, but he had trouble growing swamp milkweed. And we figured out that it was the different soil types. And not that we couldn't grow them, it's just they weren't as vibrant, they weren't as big. So just because you have one soil type doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have certain plants, but it's just something to be aware of. If you are planting something that people say is really easy to grow and you're having trouble with it, it might be soil type. So it might be something to think about. Okay, so selecting plants for your space. The next thing is height. And this only comes into play if you are doing something for like say my neighborhood median and we want to make sure that nothing covers the sign. Or if you're doing something, if you're HOA, you might have restrictions for that. So that's something to check out. Sometimes people like to keep shorter plants in their front yard and do a more wild backyard. Just because the shorter plants are the ones that are more visible. So just kind of keep that in mind. So if you do have a space, maybe you have a corner lot and traffic is coming by and you have to keep things a certain height, that might just be a limiting factor. And then finally, for your selecting plants for your space, you want to keep in mind aggressiveness. So there are 2 main types that plants can spread, one via roots and one via seed. And some plants are aggressive by both. Some plants are aggressive by neither. So one thing we like to talk about is common milkweed. We don't generally encourage that for our smaller gardens that we give out because we know that it can be aggressive via root and via seed, and it can kind of take over a space. Now, aggressiveness, I don't want to say is a bad thing because if I have a big space, I want those aggressive plants in there. I want to fill that space. But if you're looking at a smaller garden, you might want to think about things that you might want to look at the plants and see if they have a note about being aggressive. One other thing about aggressiveness is I have 2 plants black-eyed Susans and anise hyssop that I absolutely love, but they spread like crazy through seed in my garden. And so what I can do is in the fall, I can just clip those seed heads, or I can clip them before they go to seed, and then I don't have to worry about it as much. So if you're looking to plant in a smaller space, try to just make sure your plants aren't aggressive, or look for less aggressive plants, if that makes sense. Okay, so now that we talked about plants that the factors that we can't really control, now we can talk about the factors we can control. So you might love this. Sorry, before I begin, this is Midwest Native Nursery. They have this great site where you can filter different things in. And if you look on the left side, you can really see, so you can see like summer bloomers, fall bloomers, spring bloomers, and full shade. So you can kind of restrict, you can look and see what you have to, the factors that you can't control, and then you can look and see what plants are left, and then you get to choose. So maybe you want a rainbow garden or just different colors. This is where you can really be creative. And I mentioned this before, but full sun is where you're going to have the most options. A lot of plants just fall into that category. So if you're starting off, I would try and find a spot that has full sun and you have more color options. Another thing is height. That's something that might be a preference to you. You might want a big, beautiful garden with tall flowers, or you might want something smaller. So this is something that you can search for on that. There's plant height on the left side. And then another thing to consider is, what do you want to attract to your garden? So there's certain flowers that attract certain things. There's certain flowers that will attract hummingbirds, the more tubular flowers, the plants that have more tubular flowers. There's, if you love monarchs, obviously milkweed is a great one, and you can see their entire life cycle. So yeah, that's just something that kind of what you want to do just to keep in mind. One thing that we do stress with all gardens that we design is you want to make sure that your garden is beautiful in the spring, summer, and fall. And not only is it interest for your neighbors, it's interest for you, but that way our pollinators have those nectarine plants throughout the season. So when you're selecting these plants, make sure you have something that's blooming in the spring, something that's blooming in the summer, which there's a ton that bloom in the summer, so that's not a hard one, and then something in the fall, because your garden's not going to do any good for those pollinators if everything is in the summer, and then those migrating monarchs aren't going to have anything in your garden when they need that nourishment to keep migrating. Another thing we definitely recommend is having some grasses and sedges. So we kind of keep that in mind for a well-rounded habitat. So those seasonal bloomers, the grasses and sedges, and the grasses and sedges are, they provide nesting grounds for pollinators, which is super important. They provide protection. And honestly, for a seasonal garden, I think they're so beautiful in the winter. The grasses are. I don't know if any of you guys live by moleholes, but they've planted a whole section of blue grama, and it's just, I think it's so gorgeous. It really like makes those flowers that kind of stick up weird in the winter that you're like, oh, is that pretty? I don't know. And it just kind of fills it in. And I think it just kind of makes it that like magical habitat. Okay, so moving on, where can I find native plants? So I want to make this garden happen. Plant Nebraska is a great resource. They do traveling plant sales. Midwest Native Nurseries in Lincoln, and Bumbling Bee Native Wildflowers in Omaha, and both of them do a really good job of putting up the available plant lists. So if you want a certain plant, you can check before going down there. And they're also really good about putting limits. You might really want a Bradbury bee balm, but there's a limit of 3 and your garden plan says needs 5 or whatever, but you can kind of plan ahead for that. Prairie Legacy in Western has, I think they have pretty much everything, shrubs, trees, and wildflowers. Blueberry Nursery, they kind of have native and non-native. Great Plains Nursery is mostly shrubs and trees, I believe. And then Stock Seed Farms in Murdoch and Conservation Blueprint in St. Paul are mostly seed-based companies. And nothing against seed, but I prefer plugs, which are just the baby plants, just because it's half the work is already done. But if you have a big area, or if you're very confident in starting things via seed, those are great resources. And then you'll also notice like other local nurseries and national nurseries will have some sort of limited selection. I know Mohol's has a pretty good selection in Omaha, but they have a lot of non-native plants, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not exclusively native like Midwest Natives Nursery is more exclusively native. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, if you are more on the western part of the state, there are some online nurseries that are pretty good. I had a couple notes. Prairie Moon Nursery and Prairie Nursery might be something that you could look into for those. And I want to note that if you guys have any places that you have found natives and been very successful, let us know, because we constantly want to add to this list. We understand it is hard to find native plants. You can't just go somewhere on any certain day and go to the store and grab some. Like, a lot of these places have restricted business hours. I know like Midwest Natives, I think, has plant sales on pretty much exclusively on Saturdays. So if you have any places, like, we'd love to know that, so that way we can share that in the future. Okay. And then finally, for my getting a pollinator garden started, I just wanted to talk about the importance of getting your native plants established. So you have these plants and you're like, oh, they don't have to, they're good in our climate, we don't have to worry about them. That is not true. We need to make sure that they get that root development that first year in order to set them up for success for the following years. So we recommend a pretty strict watering schedule. The first week to the second week, we recommend watering every other day. Week 3 to 4, water twice per week. And week 5 to 10, water once per week. Now, if it rains, a good rain, like half an inch, then you're good. You don't have to water. When you water, what we recommend is like 5 seconds with a hose. If you have a sprinkler, like 30 minutes in that area, or if you're just like dumping water, about 4 cups per plant. And what this is really going to do is it's going to give that plant that great start. It's going to get those roots established, and it's going to set it up for that next year. Then you don't have to worry about it as much. After native plants get established, the Nebraska weather pretty much takes care of them, except for like in severe drought. Then you'll have to give them a little bit of water, but really setting them up for success early is how you get those beautiful flowers for years to come. Another thing is critters. We get a lot of questions about critters. And of course, critters are a super important part of the ecosystem. I love bunnies. I love squirrels. They're all great, but I don't like when they eat my plants. So what we recommend is for young plants that you notice are getting eaten by maybe bunnies, asters in my yard, they just love those. That is like the best snack for them. I just put a little chicken wire enclosure around them, and I use these garden staples that I just order online, and it just kind of keeps it safe for that first even couple months. Like, sometimes I leave it a little bit longer, but if those plants aren't getting established, it's not going to benefit anybody. So protecting them when they're so young from those critters helps them become these beautiful plants that then it doesn't matter if a bunny comes and nibbles on it, because it's big enough. It can provide. It's providing for so many more. Another thing I want to note with that is a lot of times we say bunnies came and ate down my plants and they're no longer there. Well, we found that plants can tolerate some of the nibbling as long as the roots aren't pulled out. So it's still worth trying to protect and save that plant, even if you feel like the bunny mowed it down. If those roots are still in there, there's still a really good chance that it'll grow. So if you protect it, and you can kind of see if it'll bounce back. And then finally, using native plants is gardening for the future. So there's this rule where it's sleep, creep, leap. So that first year, some of your plants are going to do great, but some of your plants are going to just work on that root development. And it's super important. And then the next year, they're going to focus on the root development and get a little bit bigger. And then by that third year, you're going to see them bloom and be beautiful. One example I have is large flower beard tongue. The first year I had it was this little like thing of leaves. And then the second year was a little bit bigger, and I was like, I don't know. Is this going to work? And then that third year, it was so gorgeous. So just kind of being patient patient with these plants and knowing that not all of those plants are going to be ready to go that first year. But then you'll also find that some native plants are biannual, or they bloom a ton and they spread by reseeding. So blanket flower is an example of that. I think to some extent, Anise hyssop, black-eye Susans, they produce a lot of seeds, but that original plant may not live more than a couple years. So just kind of keep in mind that native plants are special in their own way. And then, okay, so with that, I am going to pass it on to Bob to talk about keeping pollinators safe.
Thanks, Stacey. I appreciate you. So now you've attracted pollinators to your garden. So how do you keep them safe? So pollinators aren't just bees, they're not just birds, they're not just the butterflies. Like I mentioned earlier, they're wasps, they're moths, they're flies, beetles, and even bats. All of those different animals are truly pollinators. And it's important to keep all those pollinators in mind when you're creating your habitat. So with that, a few things that I'm going to talk about on this slide here are going to be the pesticides, nesting sites, things like that, maintenance of your garden. But I really want to focus on the pesticides piece. So, and just to clarify, pesticides is a catch-all term. Sometimes people think of the word pesticide as only like an insect repellent, but pesticides is, like I said, is a catch-all term. It covers herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. So when someone says pesticides, they're talking about all three of those things: herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. So whenever possible, avoid pesticides because they can contaminate the entire ecosystem and be harmful for different organisms, not just insects, but the plant, even your plants. So I really want to talk about that a little bit deeper, and I'll tell a little story about my own misunderstanding of the term pesticides. For a long time, I thought pesticides meant just insecticides, and so when I was buying herbicides for a very long time, I had my pollinator garden that I first started. I had a lot of lawn space around it still, and it was important to me to keep it clean and tidy and not have dandelions popping up and all that, right? And it was even in my backyard, so no one was seeing the dandelions but me. But I was still in the mindset like, oh my goodness, if there's a dandelion in my yard, I'm a terrible neighbor. So I was still putting herbicides down, and I would use like the stuff that you would put on your hose and spray, right? And I didn't understand drift, but I also, this is a good learning experience for me. So I'm telling this story to hopefully educate some of you folks who maybe are making the same errors that I was. But so I used, I don't remember the brand, but one of those ones that you put on to kill dandelions, right? But I had already established a milkweed area in my garden, a lot of milkweed. And when Stacey was talking about the butterfly milkweed versus the swamp milkweed, I believe I'm that friend because the butterfly milkweed would just grow and reseed itself in my garden. But anyway, so I had all this beautiful milkweed, and when I sprayed the dandelion killer on my yard, the wind was just a little stronger than it should have been. I read the instructions. I'm like, oh, what's 2 miles per hour more? And it did drift into my garden. And other than a couple yellow spots on my milkweed leaves, nothing died. And I was like, okay, well, it wasn't so bad after all. Well, I had tons of caterpillars, tons of monarch caterpillars all over my milkweed. And they were growing, and chunky monarch caterpillars living their best life, eating all the milkweed leaves. And then I noticed as they started to go into chrysalis stage, they would die in their chrysalis stage. So when they formed that chrysalis, they either before they actually formed as into a butterfly, or when they tried to eclose from their chrysalis, they were dying or deformed. And I later learned after researching, because I saw quite a few of them not make it through to being a butterfly. And I was really sad about that. So I researched it and I found out that a lot of herbicides have growth inhibitors in them. So those dandelion preventers have a lot of growth inhibitors. Well, it doesn't just stop the plant from growing, when insects ingest those growth inhibitors, it also can impact their growth cycle as well. And what I learned was it really can impact caterpillars and larvae that go through those different metamorphosis stages. So if you use an herbicide that has growth inhibitors, it's going to impact those insects as well. So I tell that story. I know I focused a lot on the pesticides because I don't think a lot of people realize that herbicides have uh, chemicals in it that really can do a lot of harm to our pollinators. And then, when the birds eat those impacted insects, it just goes up the food chain, right? So, I mean, we've all heard the stories about DDT probably and what that did to our bird populations and the egg shells. So, be mindful of any chemicals that you're putting into your garden. And if you do choose to use those, I'm not judging. Like I said, I'm meeting everyone where they are. If you choose to use them, just keep a safe distance from your garden. Don't make the same mistake that I did. And then really pay attention to those instructions, because a couple miles per hour in wind can really impact how that drift happens. So some other things here on this slide I'll touch on really quick is we need to provide nesting sites. So what can you do? Some of the best thing that you can do is, if you have trees or shrubs that you trim, find a corner in your yard or something behind maybe a shed and just create a little wood pile with sticks and logs, because so many pollinators use that for overwintering. So start yourself a little mini wood pile or stick pile. If you don't want people to see it, put it behind the shed, put it behind the garage, wherever out of sight, and it'll do a lot of good. I have 3 different wood piles in my yard now, and sometimes I need to move them for whatever reason, and the amount of insects in various stages of their life is incredible. So I feel like a little boy again every time I move one of my wood piles. So yeah, so another thing that is really good, leaving some bare ground. So in your garden, just don't put anything there. Don't put any mulch. Don't put any plants, just a little bare soil. There are so many especially native bees that will find bare ground and create a little nest. If you've ever seen those random holes in the ground, there's probably a little bee in there or some kind of beetle. So leave some open space in your garden too, and that will definitely provide some nesting sites for our pollinators. Then the last, second to last bullet point on this slide is about cleanup or preparing to replant. So I'm sure many of us have heard the no mow May trend, right? No mow May, where you don't mow through the whole month of May. And then there's also leave the leaves. So let's first touch on no mow May, because we're coming up on spring. That I started seeing on social media maybe about 7 years ago, and it picks up steam about this time, March and April, you'll start seeing stuff about it on social media. But I don't necessarily like that term personally, because when Stacey was talking about keeping your garden appealing to your neighbors, especially if you're in the suburbs or city, if you have a messy yard, sometimes that can turn people off from using native plants. So for me, what no mow May means is really about keeping safe space for your pollinators that have overwintered. So if you have lawn grass next to a pollinator garden, please, by all means, keep your grass maintained, because I can promise you that grass has no nutritional value, or little nutritional value, for most of our native insects. They're probably not doing a lot in your grass. So letting your grass get really tall and unkept and annoying your neighbors is not doing any good. Now, if you have a pollinator garden with stems and sticks, and you've kept up the seed heads from last year, that's great, because you're going to have bees and beetles and all kinds of pollinators that have left their eggs or their larvae are living in there from throughout the winter. So we want to wait until it's a steady 50 degrees in spring before we start cleaning up those gardens. So I don't know if anyone has the perfect answer because there's so many different species living in your pollinator garden. But I really like to wait until late April for me before I ever start cleaning my garden beds. I know if you're on this call, you probably love gardening and you want to get out there as soon as the warm weather hits. I even saw people talking about cleaning up their gardens and when the weather was nice last week. And it's like, no, it's gonna snow today. They need those leaves and they need those sticks and stuff to survive. So try to in your pollinator garden, try to avoid cleaning that up, okay? And then leave the leaves is a trend on keeping your leaves in the fall instead of mowing them over and creating mulch, which all you're going to do is kill the pollinators you're attracting. Put them in a nice space underneath your tree or put them in your garden. So the pollinators that are in those leaves, the eggs, the larvae, they have a chance to survive the winter. The last thing is minimize outdoor lighting. That can really impact moths. They'll sit there and I'm sure all of us have seen that late at night where you see moths circling over and over again. They're just burning up all their energy and it kills them faster. And then, they're not going to go look for the food that they need to eat. So if you can turn your lights off at night, that does a lot of good. Also for lightning bugs, they need darker areas to mate. They send signals. So if there's too much light, they're not going to be able to attract their mates, it really impacts their mating season. So Stacey, if you want to go on to the next slide there, we'll talk about encouraging others.
I was actually going to say we have about 10 minutes left, I think. Hannah, do you want us to just open it up to questions at this point?
Yeah, I think if you're ready for questions, we can.
Okay, yeah, we had some more, but with the technical difficulties and everything, maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and we can open it up for questions.
One thing, maybe if we get 1 minute and talk about our events before.
Oh, yeah. Yes. If that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think we have plenty of time, 8 minutes. I can do it in 2 minutes or less. So as that's loading up, so I do want to let people know about some upcoming events that we have. So we have in May 15th and 16th, we have our big plant giveaway, which is at South High School. And that is from 1 to 4 p.m. It's first come, first serve, and we will be serving 275 households. And everything's free. We provide a pre-designed garden design, and that's really because a lot of the people that we serve, it might be their first introduction to native plants. So they can do what they will with their design. We give them the resources to choose the best garden type. And from there, they can go and take these plants home and they can really either create a whole new space or add to their existing garden. We just want to give them the resources they need to get started. From there, we also have native gardens for shared spaces. So what that is, we select 50 to 55 organizations. Each year we serve 25 counties at this time, about 20 each year. 20 different Nebraska counties we serve. And that's really for churches, businesses, schools, any public space. The key word there is it has to be open to the public. So if you're somewhere in Nebraska, you don't have to be in Lincoln, you don't have to be in Omaha. Like I said, we serve 20 counties on average each year. I think last year we did 25 counties. So if you're interested in putting a native garden in your community, in a school, park, anywhere, reach out to us. We have the applications come out. Stacey, is it late March, early April is usually when those come out?
Early April. Yep.
Early April. And then the last thing that I want to touch on here before we open the questions up is we also do plant one, take ones. You really have to follow us on social media to know about those. Those are pop-up events, but those are my favorite thing that we do. We will literally plant a community garden with 250 to 500 plants in about an hour to 2 hours. So we invite the community to come out, put a garden in, and then everybody gets to take home plants at the end. So it's another great way for people to get free native plants to put in their gardens. So those are some things that we'll have coming up through the growing season. If you want to know more information, follow us on Facebook. That's the best way, or our website, which is nebraskamonarchs.com. So I think we have our top five plants too, if you want to cover those really fast.
You know what? I think we should open it up for questions.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Yeah.
All right, so in the chat, we had a few things. I'll read a couple of things just for everyone before we get to questions. One, someone said Mulhall's Nursery has a good selection of native plants, and we have definitely worked with them in the past. Faller Landscape, which is based in York, also has a selection of native plants, including trees and shrubs. They've been a good partner on grant projects for sure in that area.
Could you say that again for me?
Yeah,
What's
Faller.
Faller in York?
Faller Nursery, they're in York.
Okay.
Somebody asked if lantana is good for pollinators, and Toby was able to find an excellent article by Sarah Browning explaining the benefits of lantana. So that is in the chat. Someone else
asked. For me, lantana, it attracts a lot of moths. I get a lot of moth caterpillars on there.
Oh, okay. Well, perfect. It sounds like, yes, lantana is a very good option, especially in containers, right? Do you have yours in container? Yeah. So that's especially if you are limited in space and looking for a way to support pollinators, that could be a really good option. Tim asked, has there been any scientific consensus on the impact of bird feeders on pollinators in gardens? And I was able to find one study about beetles that I put in the chat, but I don't know, have you all heard anything specifically on that?
Personally, that's not something I've researched.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a correlation somewhere in there, but maybe that's the next study that needs to happen.
I know that you can garden for birds. I mean, the goldfinches love our coneflowers and certain things. I know sometimes the leftover shells or whatever seed can get into your garden and create its own like little plants, which isn't necessarily the greatest. I've had some experience with that, but yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the best bird feeder for any garden is native plants, personally.
Yeah, I think one thing to remember, getting some feedback. Let's see, one thing to remember.
No one said anything about
Let's see.
I think it just muted someone.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I was trying to find who needed muted. So one thing to remember is that while the adult birds eat a lot of seeds, they use insect larvae especially to feed their broods. So they need to get those from native pollinator plants, right? So that's a really good place to look. Lisa pointed out that they have native plants for free through Green Bellevue at the Bellevue Farmers Market. So that's a good place to go.
I got your swamp milkweed from there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it got me into it.
And Rayma would like to know, light to provide safety outside versus saving pollinators. You know, sometimes you need that to walk the path safely. Does yellow light reduce the threat enough?
So I'm not an expert on lighting. I have heard that you can purchase special lights that reduce the impact on moths and bird migration. I think the study that I read last year was more about bird migration, but I don't know enough about it to speak confidently. But there are studies out there on what type of lights to use.
And I think there's like a motion sensor light is better than one that's just on all the time.
I agree.
Yeah. When it comes to wood piles and providing habitat, do those need to be in a sunny area?
I don't think so. I have some that are under a really shady area under bushes that have tons of different insects in them, and then I have some full sun as well. So I think plant them and put them in both, and you'll see insects in both. great question.
Yes. And I think just one more great resource is the Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland. They also have plant sales and events all throughout the growing season to help you in your journey to plant native for sure. Do you have any suggestions for early blooming plants in a rain garden at Hastings College?
I would have to look. I'd have to look a little bit on that. Is it full sun?
Yes, I've been there. It's full sun.
Yes, I do. Let me look real fast. Because we have on our website, we have a garden for, sorry, a rain garden. I think it's Golden Alexander's, but I can't remember what our rain garden design. Let's see. Yeah, Golden Alexander and Ohio Spiderwort
Oh,
are
yeah.
good for rain garden slash wet feet.
Mm-hmm. And Anne added blue flag iris, which is another good
Oh,
one.
yes.
Yes, yes. So there's a lot of recommendations in there. Phlox, prairie spiderwort, all different types of things in there. All right. Well, with that, we are at time. So I think we're going to call it there. Thank you so much to Bob and Stacy for being here today and sharing all this wonderful information. As you all should know, we send out the recording later, either later today or tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to upload. So you'll get that in your email, and I will try to do my best to also include some of the links that have been shared in the chat. So keep an eye out there. If for some reason the email doesn't get to you, you can always go to our YouTube page. You just search Plant Nebraska on YouTube, and that'll get you to all the plant talks, this one, the previous ones, and future plant talks. So thank you all so much, and I hope you get some snow today. I think everyone's ready for some snow. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Bye, everyone.